Hi everyone, welcome to Talk Easy. Today, Catherine and Mike will help you master conditionals like, if it rains, I will stay home, or if I had known, I would have called. Learn how to use them for advice and hypothetical situations. Let's get started.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. You know how sometimes in English you hear those if-then statements? Like, if it rains, then I'll stay inside.
Yeah.
Well, today we're going to be tackling those little guys. We call them conditionals.
Yeah, it can be a bit tricky.
That's right. But they're everywhere, from everyday conversations to like books and movies.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Once you learn how to use them, well, they can make you sound super smart and confident.
Definitely.
And we've got some fun facts up our sleeve today. Like, did you know there are actually 3 types of conditionals?
Yeah, it's true.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Don't worry, we'll break them all down in a way that's easy peasy.
I'll make sure it all makes sense.
But first, let's start with the one we use for talking about things that could really happen. The first conditional.
Right, so this is the one we use for, like, real possibilities.
Exactly. Like, if the weather's nice this weekend, I'll go to the beach.
Yeah, perfect example.
So, how do these first conditionals work? What's the grammar magic behind them?
Okay, so it's actually pretty straightforward. You start with if plus a present tense verb.
Got it.
Then you add a comma and follow it up with will and the base form of another verb.
So, if it's sunny, I will go for a walk.
Exactly.
Now, I've noticed that sometimes we swap out that will for other words like may, might, or can.
You're right. And that's a great way to show how certain or uncertain we are about something happening.
Oh, I see. So, if it's sunny, I might go for a walk means I'm not totally sure yet.
Yeah, exactly. It shows you're open to the possibility but not fully committed.
That's cool. So we can fine-tune our meaning just by choosing the right word.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm feeling good about this first conditional thing. But what about those what-if situations, like the stuff of daydreams?
So you're ready to explore the second conditional.
I am. Bring on the hypotheticals.
This is where we get to imagine things that aren't true right now, or might even be impossible.
Like winning the lottery.
Exactly. You might say, if I won the lottery, I would travel the world.
Oh man, I wish. Okay, so grammatically speaking, what's the recipe for a second conditional?
So it starts the same as the first conditional with if.
Okay.
But then we use the past simple tense.
So if I won the lottery.
Right. Then we follow that with would and the base form of the verb.
If I won the lottery, I would travel the world.
Perfect.
But hold on a second. There's this one thing that always trips me up with the second conditional. Sometimes we use were instead of was, even when talking about ourselves. Like, if I were a millionaire.
You're right. It can be a bit confusing. That's the subjunctive mood at play.
The what now?
The subjunctive mood. It's a special verb form we use to talk about hypothetical or unreal situations.
Huh. So it's not just me being grammatically challenged. It's like a whole different mood.
Exactly. And it's a good thing to be aware of, even though it might seem a bit strange at first.
Well, I'm glad we cleared that up. It's nice to know there's a reason behind it. So we've got the first conditional for real possibilities and the second conditional for daydreams and hypotheticals. But what about those times when we think back and say, ugh, if only I had done things differently?
Yes, you're talking about the third conditional, the land of regret and missed opportunities.
That's the one. So tell me, what's the grammatical formula for expressing all that if-only angst?
All right, so with the third conditional, we're dealing with the past. Things that could have happened but didn't.
Okay.
So we start with if, just like the other two types.
So if I had known it was going to rain, I would have brought an umbrella.
Exactly.
Wow. So we've got present simple, past simple, and now past perfect, all mixed up in these conditionals. Is there a way to remember which tense goes with which conditional?
You're right, it can be a bit of a juggling act, but think of it this way. The verb tenses match the time frame you're talking about.
Oh, I see. So present tense for future possibilities in the first conditional. Past simple for present or future hypotheticals in the second conditional. And past perfect for past hypotheticals in the third conditional.
You got it.
This is making me realize how much grammar is like time travel. We're constantly shifting back and forth between different time frames.
That's a great way to put it, and these conditionals give us the tools to navigate those time shifts accurately.
Okay, my brain is buzzing with all these conditional insights. Let's pause here for a second and compare all 3 types side by side so everyone can really see the differences.
Great idea. Let's start with the first conditional, for real possibilities in the future. If it snows tomorrow, I will build a snowman. present tense in the if clause, and will in the main clause.
Okay, got it. Now, the second conditional for what-if scenarios in the present or future. If I were taller, I would play basketball. Past simple in the if clause and would in the main clause.
And lastly, the third conditional for those unreal situations in the past. If I had trained harder, I would have won the race. Past perfect with had trained and would have in the main clause.
So it all comes down to matching those verb tenses with the right time frame. Present tense and will for the first, past simple and would for the second, and past perfect and would have for the third.
Exactly. Think of it like a formula. Once you get the hang of it, it becomes much easier to use.
I feel like I've just unlocked a secret level of English grammar.
And the best part is, this is just the beginning. There's so much more to explore with conditionals, and we'll be diving into some more of those nuances in the next part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned, everyone. It's about to get even more interesting.
You know, it's funny, when you think about it,
What's that?
conditionals aren't just about grammar rules.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean?
Well, they're really about how we think. Like all the different possibilities and choices we imagine.
Oh, that's a good point. It's like we're mapping out different paths in our minds, right?
Like, what if this happens? Or if only I had done that.
I like that. It's like we're all secret novelists coming up with different storylines in our heads.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, but before we get too carried away with our hypothetical masterpieces, let's look at some real-world examples. How do these conditionals actually show up in everyday conversations?
Sure. So one of the sources we looked at used this phrase, if you're feeling overwhelmed, take a break.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Simple but powerful.
Right. It's a perfect example of how we use the first conditional for giving advice, like, if this happens, then you should do this.
It's like a gentle nudge towards self-care.
Yeah. Exactly. And it works in so many different situations, like, if you're hungry, grab a snack, or if you're tired, go to bed.
It's like a template for making good decisions.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, I'm ready for a second conditional example now. Let's hear one of those hypothetical situations.
All right, how about this? If I could speak any language, I would choose Japanese.
Oh, I love that. It's like a little window into someone's dreams.
Right, and it shows how even though these what-if situations might not be real, they can still tell us a lot about what people want and value.
That's so true. It makes me think of all those times I've daydreamed about having superpowers. Like, if I could fly, I would.
Uh-huh, don't we all? But it is interesting to think about. What would you do if you had the power to change the world?
That's a tough one. But I think I would focus on spreading kindness and empathy. You know, those things that can really make a difference.
That's a beautiful goal, and it shows how these hypothetical situations can inspire us to act in positive ways, even in the real world.
Okay, enough with the superpowers for now. Let's shift gears to the third conditional. The one that deals with all those past regrets.
Right. The if-only moments.
Exactly. One of the sources had this example. If I had left home earlier, I wouldn't have missed the train.
Ooh, that's a painful one.
Tell me about it. I can't count how many times I've been in that situation, rushing to catch the train and just missing it.
It's a universal experience, and it shows how we use the third conditional to mentally replay those past situations and imagine what could have been different.
It's like we have a built-in time machine in our minds. But instead of changing the past, we're just analyzing it, trying to learn from our mistakes.
Exactly. And sometimes that can be just as helpful as actually going back in time.
Okay, confession time. I used to have a really hard time with the third conditional. Like I would always mess up the tenses. I would say things like, if I knew about the sale, I would have gone.
It's a common mistake. Those past tenses can get tricky sometimes.
They really can. But practice makes perfect, right?
It definitely helps. The more you use these structures, the more natural they'll become.
You're right. It's like learning a new dance move. It might feel awkward at first, but with enough practice, it becomes second nature.
Exactly. And just like with dancing, mastering the grammar can actually make it more enjoyable.
I like that analogy. It's not just about getting the steps right, but feeling the music and expressing yourself. Okay, but speaking of common mistakes, what are some other things to watch out for when using conditionals?
So one source pointed out this interesting thing. The difference between using would and could in the main clause of a conditional statement.
Oh, tell me more about that. They seem pretty interchangeable to me.
They are often used that way, but would expresses a definite intention or willingness, while could suggests a possibility or ability.
Oh, I think I see what you mean. So if I had more time, I would learn to play the piano implies that I'm serious about it.
Exactly. You're committed to it if the circumstances were right.
But if I had more time, I could learn to play the piano suggests it's something I'm capable of doing, but not necessarily something I will do.
Right. It's a subtle difference, but it can change the meaning of what you're saying.
This is making me realize how much thought goes into crafting these if-then statements. They seem so simple on the surface, but there's a lot going on beneath the surface.
It's true. They're like mini arguments packaged up in everyday language.
And I want to go back and analyze some of my favorite books and speeches just to see how conditionals are being used.
It's like having a whole new way of looking at language.
It is. Okay, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed with all this new information, but in a good way.
That's a good sign. It means you're really engaging with the material. And the cool thing is, there's always more to learn.
That's both exciting and a little bit terrifying. But okay, before we go any further, let's do a quick recap of what we've covered so far.
Good idea. So we started by looking at the three main types of conditionals. The first for real possibilities, the second for hypotheticals, and the third for past regrets.
Right, and we talked about how those tricky verb tenses play a key role in each type.
We also looked at the difference between would and could, and how those little words can have a big impact on meaning.
And we even talked about how conditionals are used in storytelling and persuasive writing, which was super interesting.
It's been quite a journey, but believe it or not, there's still more to come. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll be looking at some of the most common conditional mistakes that even native English speakers make.
Ooh, I can't wait to hear about those. So stay tuned, everyone, because things are about to get even more insightful. All right, welcome back, everyone. It's time to wrap up our deep dive into conditionals.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, from those everyday if-then statements to some pretty complex grammar concepts.
We've even journeyed back in time, exploring those what-if moments that make us wonder how things could have been different.
But like with any tool, there are some common pitfalls you got to watch out for.
Oh, absolutely. Even native English speakers make these mistakes sometimes.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I know I've definitely tripped up on those verb tenses before, like accidentally using the present tense when I should have used the past.
Ah, yes, a classic conditional conundrum. It's easy to get those tenses mixed up, especially with the second conditional and all those hypothetical situations.
You're telling me it felt so weird at first to say, if I were you, instead of if I was you.
Right, but now we know why that were is so important.
It's all about that subjunctive mood magic, signaling we're in the land of imagination.
Exactly. But speaking of mistakes, another common one is mixing up the different types of conditionals.
Oh, I've been there. It's like which if clause goes with which verb tense. It can get pretty confusing. What are your tips for keeping those conditionals straight?
Well, the key is to really pay attention to the time frame you're talking about.
Yeah.
Are you dealing with a real possibility in the future?
So that would be the first conditional.
You got it. Now, what about those hypothetical situations? Something that could happen in the present or future, but not necessarily.
So that would be the second conditional.
Right, again. And what about when you're looking back at the past and thinking, ugh, if only.
That's got to be the third conditional. All those missed opportunities.
You're on a roll.
So basically, it's like we're time travelers, using these different conditionals to explore different possibilities across the past, present, and future.
I like that. It's all about understanding the timeline and choosing the right conditional to fit the situation. And just like with anything else, practice makes perfect. The more you use these structures, the more natural they'll become.
That's reassuring. So it's not about being perfect, it's about progress.
Exactly. Even native English speakers are constantly learning and refining their grammar. Language is always evolving, and there's always something new to discover.
I love that perspective. Okay, so now that we've covered some common mistakes, how can we actually use conditionals to enhance our communication? Like, what are some of those more advanced strategies?
One of the sources we looked at talked about how conditionals can be really powerful in negotiation and persuasion. Like, if you can frame your request or argument within an if-then structure.
Oh, I see what you mean. So instead of just saying, hey, can I have a raise? You could say something like, if I take on these extra responsibilities, would you consider a salary increase?
You got it. It's a subtle way of suggesting a win-win situation. Like your boss gets more value and you get rewarded for your hard work.
Wow, that's clever. It's like a subtle art of persuasion, using these if-then statements to kind of steer the conversation in the right direction.
Right. And it can be a lot more effective than just making demands.
This is making me realize how much power these little conditionals actually have. They're like these tiny but mighty tools that can make a big difference in how we communicate.
They really are. And the more you understand the nuances, the better you can use them to achieve your goals and get your message across.
Well, I think it's safe to say that our deep dive into conditionals has been a huge success.
Hey.
We've gone from those basic if-then statements all the way to some really advanced applications.
Yeah, we've talked about verb tenses, time travel, even the subtle art of persuasion.
It's been quite the journey.
It has. And hopefully our listeners are feeling inspired to go out there and use their newfound knowledge to level up their communication skills.
I think they are. So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave our listeners with one final question to ponder. Think back to a recent decision you made, a choice you faced. Now ask yourself, how might your life be different today if you had chosen a different path? What doors might have opened? What challenges might you have avoided?
It's an interesting thought experiment, isn't it? It reminds us that even the smallest choices can have big consequences down the road.
And maybe by exploring those what-if scenarios, we can gain new insights about ourselves and the decisions we make.
Exactly.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. But remember, learning doesn't stop here. Keep those conditional muscles flexed, explore those linguistic nuances, and don't be afraid to make mistakes.
That's how we learn and grow.
And on that note, we'll say goodbye for now. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive adventure, and until next time, happy exploring.